This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The annual Jewish holiday of Purim is a tense time in the West Bank's second largest city, Hebron. Clashes between the city's Palestinian residents and right-wing Israeli settlers have left dozens injured in the past. On Friday, a 44-year-old Palestinian man was beaten by a mob of settlers. Nur Odeh reports.
Passing through metal turnstiles and extensive searches to get to the holy Ibrahimi mosque or go home are a daily reality for Hebron's Palestinian population of 170,000. This is a bitterly segregated city, more so this weekend when Hebron's approximately 600 Israeli settlers celebrate the festive holiday of Purim. We were informed Hebron's old city is a closed military zone for everyone else, while Israeli settlers celebrate.
This is a military area? Starting when? Starting when? When did it start, Yani, being? From now?
The Purim celebrations involve a lot of drinking, and settlers of all ages engage in the drinking. Weary of outsiders, the settlers greeted the media with stones.
Right now they're not really, they drunk, okay? And please take a distance, okay? Even they don't even say it.
There is an international presence in Hebron mandated to monitor, but unauthorized to intervene. They tell me the Israeli military presence is very heavy this year.
I think Purim being quite a joyful holiday in general hasn't such a joyful history in Hebron because the massacre in 1994 happened during Purim. But that aside, during Purim the Israeli army is reinforcing their presence in the city, so there's about 100 more soldiers in the city right now compared to a normal situation when there's about 300.
Purim started Thursday at sundown. At night it was especially tense when we went to Hebron's isolated Tel Armedi neighborhood, where the illegal Israeli outpost of Beit Hadassah is. Not a Palestinian soul was in sight. Israeli settlers went about their business heavily guarded by Israeli police and military. Palestinian residents of neighborhoods in Hebron's old city have to go through gates like this to get home. There are 103 such gates in the city's historic center. It's a punitive reality Palestinian residents feel they must endure just to stay home. Nur Odeh, Al Jazeera, Hebron in the occupied West Bank.
There are reports from Syria that security forces there have shot dead 3 Kurds during celebrations for the Kurdish New Year. The incident follows trouble in the southeast of Turkey during similar festivities. In the town of Viran Sahir, violence swept through the streets instead of celebrations. Tessa Parry-Wingfield reports.
A New Year's celebration that soon turned violent. At a time that should be a festival for Kurds as they mark the advent of spring. In Viran Sahir, firebombs and stones hurled at police as they tried to take cover. They responded with tear gas. 9 police were injured in the scuffles and 16 people arrested. And many joining the chorus of challenge to the Turkish state and showing their support for a Kurdish rebel group and its imprisoned leader. In other southeastern towns, unrest also swept through the streets. It's not the first time activists have used the festivities to highlight their demands for autonomy. But this year, the celebrations follow Turkish military strikes in northern Iraq, targeted at Kurdish fighters. This is what it should have been like. Scenes from earlier in the day from Diyarbakir. Tens of thousands of people celebrating in the streets. A noisy but peaceful gathering, but overshadowed by tight security and the fear of what soon became a reality. Tessa Parry-Wingfield, Al Jazeera.
3 Qassam rockets fired from Gaza landed in the western Negev today, shattering Purim festivities well underway in the area. No one was injured and no damage was reported, but panic broke out as the color red sirens blared and sent revelers running for cover. Meanwhile, Purim celebrations across the country were held in full display amid tightened security, including an imposed closure on the territories. IBA's Eli Wogelenter has the story.
Israeli security is on high alert this weekend, not just because of the Purim holiday, but also because the days coincide with the end of the 40-day Islamic mourning period for Imad Muniyah, the Hezbollah commander who was assassinated in Damascus last month. Police were deployed in large numbers in order to guard crowded locations and public celebrations. This afternoon, along the Gaza border, 3 Qassam rockets were launched from northern Gaza toward Israel as residents of the western Negev celebrated the Purim holiday in street shows and fairs. One of the rockets reportedly landed on the Palestinian side of the security fence along the border. No injuries have been reported and no damage was caused. Elsewhere across the country, the holiday spirit was on full display, aided by the unusually warm weather. Traditional Purim parades were held in many locations, except for Jerusalem, where the parade will take place on Sunday. The traditional Cholon Ad Lo Yada parade and carnival took place at noon. The theme was 60 years in the eyes of the children and featured characters dressed up as former prime ministers. Tel Aviv, the city that never sleeps, held its parade beginning this morning. Amid the festivities, much attention this year is being given to Sderot, the western Negev town on the border with Gaza that is under constant bombardment of Qassam rockets. Worldwide campaigns by many organizations and schools resulted in thousands of Mishloach Manot food packages being distributed to residents of Sderot last night and today. Organizers were hoping to be able to distribute a Mishloach Manot package to each and every resident of the beleaguered town. Eli Wogelenter, IBA News.
The Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya this week hosted an international symposium that explored the sensitive issue of human rights as part of Israel's struggle to defend its security and, in many cases, its very existence. Among the distinguished guests at the gathering, which was organized by the American Jewish Congress, was Harvard law professor and renowned attorney Alan Dershowitz. Speaking to IBA's Leah Zinder, Dershowitz lashed out at those who criticize Israel's human rights record.
Polls today published by the Palestinian researchers show that the vast majority of Palestinian civilians and citizens approve of killings of Israelis, approve of terrorism, approve of the rockets. When you have a democracy, and Hamas claims to be the winner in a democratic vote, and Hamas is carrying out terrorist acts, there is some degree of collective accountability. Britain held Germany collectively responsible for the Second World War when it bombed Dresden and when it engaged in acts of warfare that killed many German civilians. So there is a degree of collective accountability on the part of many Palestinians, but nonetheless, the collective accountability still hasn't resulted in Israel targeting civilians. Israel tries to take whatever military actions are appropriate, and civilians sometimes die in the process. Now,
nevertheless, at the same time, Israel's High Court of Justice does try to protect the rights of individual Palestinians and does, in fact, allow them to petition the High Court of Justice.
It's the only court in the world that allows its enemies to bring cases to the court and allows its enemies to determine, in many ways, the limitations imposed on how terrorism is fought. As President Barack has said, Israel must fight with one hand tied behind its back, while almost every other country in the world fights with its hands, its feet, and its fingernails in every possible way. How dare countries like Russia suggest that Israel violates human rights? Look at what Russia did in Chechnya. How dare Great Britain allege these? Look at what it did in Kenya. Britain's actions in Kenya were among the most grievous violations of human rights in the 20th century. How dare France use torture routinely and collective punishment against civilians in Algeria complain? How dare the United States complain? More civilians are being killed in Iraq today in a 4-year war than Israel has killed in its battle with terrorism since 1929.
But more and more yours and a few others are lone voices in the wilderness. What should Israel be doing to try to change the misperception in the world?
Israel should continue to do what it's doing, and that is fighting terrorism within the moral constraints imposed by its own people. It should ignore the hypocrisy of those who would boycott only Israel academics or divest only from Israel, the hypocrisy of those, particularly in Britain, who ignore real human rights violations, who are silent in Rwanda, who are silent in Darfur, who are silent about the occupation by China of Tibet, who are silent about Russian atrocities, who are silent about Iran, and who see only one villain, the Jew among nations. Let them look in the mirror and see them for what they are, vicious anti-Semite.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to discuss ways of pushing the peace process forward. Lavrov criticized the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and called on Israel to immediately stop its settlement activities and to lift the Gaza blockade. The Russian Foreign Minister's trip aimed to find out the opinions of both the Palestinian and the Israeli sides about Moscow's desire to host an international peace conference.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived in the Palestinian territories with many issues to discuss. On the Israeli-Palestinian issue, Lavrov emphasized the importance of stopping settlement activities and the targeting of civilians. He emphasized the importance of holding a Moscow peace conference, in spite of hesitation from Israel.
We have had active discussions with members of the Quartet Committee, Arab countries, and the United Nations. We agreed on holding the Moscow Conference on Peace in the Middle East. A date for the conference will be fixed in the near future. The conference agenda is to follow up and implement the commitments made in Annapolis.
The Palestinian side, which is politically and socially disheartened with the peace process, welcomed the invitation of the Russian foreign minister. It asked for more pressure to be placed on Israel to stop its actions, which are destroying what was built in Annapolis.
We emphasized the importance of holding the Moscow Conference as soon as possible to continue the peace process. We also stressed that the peace process requires total calm and halt to all settlement activities in the Palestinian territories. We asked the minister to discuss these issues with other parties, which he has done before.
Before meeting with Abbas, the Russian foreign minister met with the Hamas delegation in Damascus. Thus, his talks with Abbas included the internal Palestinian issue, as well as the yet unsuccessful meeting in Yemen between the two delegations from the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Hamas.
We do not want to talk about failure. We want to expect success and wait to see what happens tomorrow.
Arabiya asked Lavrov about intervening between Hamas and Israel to reach calm and a ceasefire. But the Russian foreign minister responded without affirming or confirming, thus keeping Russia's role in the area undisclosed in some aspects and revealed in others. Russia is trying to regain its regional role in the area by detangling the threads of the entangled political game between the conflicting Palestinian-Israeli sides and the inter-Palestinian sides, which is also not free from regional interference.
Israel warned its citizens abroad of the danger of getting kidnapped, which might come as a response to the assassination of Imad Muniyeh, the prominent military Hezbollah operative. The governmental anti-terrorism department's website warned Israelis abroad from getting kidnapped, particularly businessmen working with Arabs or Muslims.
حتى نبقى في الموضوع ذاته والمتعلق بدعوة موسكو لهذا.
Let's go back to the subject, which is Russia calling for a Middle East conference. I return to political analyst Syed Frangia in the studio. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed the importance that all parties are allowed to participate. Of course, this includes Syria, Hamas, and Lebanon. Lavrov is talking about the Lebanese and Syrian peace tracks. Do you think that this may pose an obstacle to the U.S. and Israel, which so far expressed their opposition and showed a hesitance to accept the Russian invitation?
أعتقد إنه خلينا نقسم الموضوع إلى قسمين.
Let us divide this matter into two parts. The reason why Israel is opposed at this time is because things have not materialized yet. Israel does not want another strong player, such as Russia, to mediate the Middle East process, which works in favor of American interests. This explains why Israel expressed its reservations. Secondly, both the United States and Israel agree that it is not necessary to reach a real solution with the Palestinians. On this issue of Syria and Hamas, there are differing opinions in Israel. A message was sent from the leadership of the Israeli military to the Prime Minister, saying that there is another alternative to war. They said this because they have their own reasons, not because they have become peaceful. They said that another war should not be launched on Lebanon and Syria before the evaluation of the previous war and its effects on Israel is completed. They said instead of war, let us open a dialogue with Syria. They believe that if they give back the Golan Heights to Syria, they could distance Syria from Iran. They also believe that this would also make Syria end its relations with Hamas and Hezbollah, which will then no longer have the same role.
Is this an Israeli-American analysis?
This is an American-Israeli analysis. However, Syria does not want to have such a dialogue. Also, the United States has prevented Syria from participating in the dialogue due to its relations with Iran. Syria's perspective is that if there is no tangible intentions to give the Golan Heights back, then why should Syria engage in a dialogue with the current American administration whose term in office is about to be over? Syria wants to wait for the next administration.
Thus, the conference in Russia aims to provide different possibilities and results from the ones that were proposed at the Annapolis conference. Let us go now to the head of the Arabic program at Nabuski News Agency, Andrei Moratzin, in Moscow. You listened to what American political analyst Richard Hellman said from Washington. He said that Syria and Hamas must end their policies so that they can participate in a peace conference, among other things. On the other hand, Moscow insists that all parties be allowed to participate. Do you believe that Russia can provide a different vision for peace than that of the U.S.?
نعم طبعا موسكو تصر على مشاركة جميع الأطراف المعنية وخلافا عن الولايات المتحدة عن واشنطن.
Of course, yes, Russia insists that all parties are allowed to participate in the Moscow conference. Contrary to Washington, Moscow does not consider the Hamas movement as extremist and insists that it should be allowed to participate, especially its leader, Khaled Michel. This is the first logic. Second, contrary to the U.S. and other Western countries, Russia is not a rough mediator. Russia is a soft mediator. Russia wants to find common ground between the conflicting parties. I think that Lavrov has already been able to mediate some agreements during the negotiations in Damascus, Palestine, and Israel. Perhaps Lavrov does not want to announce the essence of these agreements. There were talks in Damascus about the possibility of releasing the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in exchange for releasing Palestinian detainees from Israeli prisons. There are meeting points between Russia and Israel, between Russia and Hamas, between Russia and Abbas, and between Russia and Syria. Lavrov is benefiting from this advantage. Perhaps he did not announce everything. At yesterday's press conference, he said that Russia did not announce all the results that were reached during the negotiations. I believe that some agreements may have been reached and that conflicting parties will continue the negotiations.
حياكم الله. انتخب البرلمان الباكستاني أول سيدة لرئاسة
The Pakistani parliament elected the first woman speaker for the National Assembly. As she walked into the House of Parliament, three-time parliamentarian Fahmida Mirza received a warm welcome by members from all parties. Mirza belongs to the Pakistan People's Party, which was led by the former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, who was assassinated last December. Mirza comes from the Sindh province in the south. She had close relations with Bhutto, who also came from the same province.
بانتخاب الدكتورة فهميدة ميرزا رئيسة للجمعية الوطنية الباكستانية.
The election of Dr. Fahmida Mirza as Speaker of the Pakistan National Assembly is an achievement for Pakistani women in politics. The winning parties in the latest elections took a step towards assigning her to form the new government. The opposition in the parliament expressed serious intent to cooperate with the new Speaker of the National Assembly and the new government to secure Pakistan's stability.
In regards to the joint opposition, I assure you of our complete cooperation to guarantee the House accomplishes exceptional work and improves. The opposition will not take any action against you personally or against the new majority. We will not waste the time of the House, which previously led to chaos. You will see the opposition take on a positive role that supports the stability of the country.
The election of Dr. Fahmida Mirza as Speaker of the National Assembly has received the support of women's organizations. They viewed her election as an important addition to Pakistani women's achievements in politics that will encourage women to seek all important positions in the country.
النساء في المراكز الحساسة يمكن أن يكون نموذجا كبيرا.
Women in key positions could be great role models for Pakistani women. I am optimistic that Dr. Fahmida Mirza will be an excellent role model for us and that her election is a great addition to Pakistani women's achievements. If a woman reaches the position of Speaker of the National Assembly, then she can go anywhere and get any position in the government.
According to some, however, this important achievement for women in the political arena is not representative of Pakistani women in general. The majority of Pakistani women are still deprived of their basic rights, most importantly, education and health.
الطالبات في المدارس والفتيات العاملات يمثلن أقلية صغيرة بالنسبة للمرأة الباكستانية.
Young girls in education and working girls represent a small minority amongst Pakistani women. We must not look at upper-class women in Pakistan. We must look at the majority of women who are oppressed, cannot go to school or health clinics, and who cannot vote. We have to suggest to Dr. Fahmida Mirza to make this part of her agenda, recruiting strong women to work on elevating the status of women in Pakistan.
من أجل العمل على رفع مستوى المرأة الباكستانية.
ومع بدء الأحزاب الفائزة حصد ثمار فوزها الانتخابي وفرحة الكثير من النساء.
The winning parties are counting their victories and women are rejoicing over the election of a woman speaker. But eyes are turning to the next parliamentary session, during which the majority will announce their nomination for Prime Minister. It is hoped that the newly formed government will improve the political reality and the reality of Pakistani women in general. Electing a woman for the sensitive position of Speaker of the National Assembly shows the progress of Pakistani women in the political arena. But there are still many barriers and barbed wires that obstruct women from achieving their full rights, particularly in some areas where women are deprived from their right to vote. For Al Madar, this is Jamal Ismail for Abu Dhabi Channel, Islamabad.
Oil prices reach record highs and some Arab economies are booming. But why is there an outrage over bread shortages in Egypt? And why did Hosni Mubarak mobilize the army? Answers to these questions and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
The credit crunch has hit the U.S. economy hard. From Wall Street to Main Street, investors' confidence has been shaken, prompting unusual rate cuts by the Federal Reserve. The US dollar has fallen against world currencies and oil prices are touching record highs. Although some Arab economies are booming, proceeds from these skyrocketing oil prices are not filtering down to the poorer Arab countries. To travel through the Arab world right now is to experience a mood of disgruntlement and doubt, especially amongst those under 30. One of the countries hit the hardest is Egypt, where according to the World Bank, 20% of the population of 78 million lives under the poverty line of $2 a day. Rising food and oil costs have prompted a wave of discontent across Egypt in recent weeks. Textile workers, teachers, doctors, and accountants have all threatened to strike as many foods, such as meat, have become too expensive for ordinary Egyptians.
6 loaves for £2? Is this right or wrong? 6 loaves for £2? Is this right or wrong? Look, is this worth £2? There is no God but God.
What can I do for you? It is expensive for you and for us too.
To make matters worse, there is bread shortage in the land of the Nile River. 4 people have been killed in fights that broke out in bread queues in recent weeks.
People are fighting, killing for bread. Some are pulling out knives. What is happening? What is this? Famine?
I've been standing here from 7 in the morning. It's now 2 p.m. and I can't even get hold of 1 loaf of bread. I've got 5 children. Do I now have to bribe someone to get 1 loaf of bread?
Outrage over bread shortages has forced the government of Hosni Mubarak to call up the army. Mubarak has ordered army bakeries to supply bread to the commercial market to stem shortages caused by corruption and rising international wheat prices.
The army's the only one capable to plant the people's wheat. We want the government to distribute the wheat fairly amongst the poor.
Meanwhile, the outlawed Sunni Islamist group known as the Muslim Brotherhood, which campaigned for years against the government with its slogan, "Islam is the solution," is now campaigning with new slogans focused on bread, inflation, and the economy. A recent cartoon on Al Jazeera website depicts bread as the new unattainable commodity after gold and oil. An editorial in one of Egypt's largest papers had the headline, "Give us our daily bread." Mubarak has recently blamed his country's economical woes on population explosion and the global market, but many Egyptians blame it on corruption and mismanagement. The bread phenomenon is not exclusive to Egypt. Yemen, Jordan, and several other countries are suffering from inflation and shortages in food products. The gap between the haves, or have oil, and the have-nots is widening and has reached dangerous levels. Arabs will endure much, but to deny them their daily bread is